Playing a Thaumaturge as the main character in a game doesn't sound like it would be that impressive.
I thought there'd be
Thaumaturges are
something
basically
to look
magicians
at.
that perform
What
parlor
ado
tricks,
about
and
nothing?
I've gotten used to playing mages wielding elements and hurling them at my enemies in flashy graphics. It turns out, however, that having what is equal to a magician's power can make for some pretty compelling gameplay, especially from a storytelling and investigatory point of view. The Thaumaturge is a top-down CRPG-style role-playing game. In it, you play as Victor Shulsky, a Thaumaturge that is Polish as hell. In fact, most of the game takes place in and around the streets of Warsaw, Victor's old stomping grounds. He's come back because of the death of his father, who is also a powerful Thaumaturge. Victor, who is returning after decades of traveling the world, has to contend with family and old friends as he explores Warsaw, trying to unravel the mystery of his father's death while being haunted by figurative and literal demons. I bet you're wondering what a Thaumaturge can do. Trust me, I was too. It almost feels like you're a clairvoyant Sherlock Holmes who is able to call upon the power of horrific entities to aid in combat and investigation. And by horrific entities, I mean the demons that follow Victor around and do his bidding. These creatures, known by many names, are called salutors. They enhance Victor's fighting abilities while enabling him to manipulate people, if you can pass the proper skill check, that is. Victor's thaumaturgy makes investigating mysteries a breeze. His clairvoyant abilities allow him to sense the history of objects. If Victor touches an object, he can get a sense of who it belonged to through its trace. He can also glean information off of objects that would be impossible otherwise. As you investigate items and or talk to people, Victor can eventually draw a conclusion, leading you to be able to find a missing object, confront someone who is lying, etc. Now, it sounds great on paper, and would make an interesting TV show or movie, but in practicality, in-game, it means there's a lot of hitting the Thaumaturge button, so you can continuously sense items around you. Much like Batman Vision in the Arkham games, it was a mechanic that I felt compelled to use everywhere I went. When you press the button, Victor snaps his fingers and red petal-like particles flow out. If there is a point of interest, the petals linger around it. Investigations, therefore, are a lot of finger snapping from one point of interest to another. It sounds like something that would bore me to death, but the story intrigued me enough to keep going. The narrative is really unlike anything I've encountered before, and I think that's mainly due to its pedigree. The Thaumaturge is a Polish-made game that lovingly embraces and emphasizes its roots. In fact, the parts of the game that weren't crafted for the story were made as an homage to Warsaw itself. Unlike other RPGs where you get most of your XP through skill checks like combat or social interactions, in the Thaumaturge, you can get it just by wandering through the streets of Warsaw and interacting with the environment where indicated. Just buying donuts, looking at a pretty building, reading notes, or listening to a street performer will yield experience. While there are multiple paths you can choose via dialogue, you'll eventually find yourself fighting. Or, if you're like me and playing Victor as a no-nonsense asshole, you'll be fighting a whole lot. In fact, Victor will be stopped at random points to perform in novel combat more often than you think would be possible in a day. Combat in the Thaumaturge is a little strange, and it can be a bit samey. It's turn-based, and Victor always has the first move. Enemies queue up with their moves as shown in an action order bar at the top. Victor himself can use his thaumaturgy to disrupt and hurt enemies, or he can go in for damage either with his fists or pistol. You can't change what weapon he uses. Victor will do whatever attack makes the most sense for his distance from the enemies. That's fine. But you don't change your distance to enemies, even though spacing matters because enemies are forced to move up to you. The best part, however, is the ability to use your salutors in combat. While combat in the Thaumaturge can feel a bit tedious, having salutors do your bidding really helps create some fun moments that are actually visually exciting. Watching a golem smash a man into the ground or using your wraith-like salutor to freeze your enemies is fun as hell. It's strange, however, when it comes to story implications. Sometimes combat is deadly, while other times you merely knock people out and you can't choose what the outcome will be. The game decides that for you. It really lends itself to the feeling of being a choose-your-own-adventure type game instead of a full-fledged role-playing game. The Thaumaturge story unfolds over multiple acts, and your actions have consequences that will shift the entire story. Even offhand remarks can lead to repercussions down the line. And in my playthrough, I made a lot of enemies as Victor. Diplomacy was not an option. I don't want to spoil any major story elements, but let's just say Victor ends up spending a lot of time with Grigory Rasputin. Rasputin, of course, has his own goals and machination that leads to some interesting dilemmas. There are skill points that you can distribute as you gain levels, but I found that I leveled so quickly and often I could spread my points around to all trees instead of specializing in just one. Combat abilities are gained through the skill tree, but they can be tweaked using skills you purchased. For instance, you can use a skill that reduces the enemy's focus and use an ability to modify that power to give a 50% chance of interrupting your target's action. It's a fun way to modify your abilities and come up with some powerful synergies as you're brawling through the streets of Warsaw. I really liked the concept of salutors in the Thaumaturge, and I made it my goal to seek out all of them. The optional salutors have some amazingly brutal combat abilities and are definitely worth pursuing, despite the enemies made along the way. I ended up playing the Thaumaturge like a Pokemon game. When it came to salutors, I had to catch them all. The Thaumaturge isn't going to make waves like Baldur's Gate 3, but it definitely is a solid story-based CRPG. For someone like me that isn't too familiar with Polish folklore, there is a bunch of novel concepts here that elevated it beyond a traditional role-playing game. I really liked catching salutors and the investigations that led up to those moments. While not a perfect game, I found myself compelled through it just to find out how it ended. If you're interested in a more story-focused role-playing game, you should definitely check it out. Thanks for watching. We are Culture Combine.